Good afternoon and hello, everyone. My name is Rich Longo, and I will be your host for today's presentation. Thank you for joining us for the importance of change management and CMDB, presented by Flycast Partners' very own Kyle Hamilton. Kyle is an experienced pre-sales senior solutions consultant with extensive experience in collaborating with clients and IT strategies. He has been in the IT industry for well over 20 years and has experience in a variety of IT tools as well as a variety of IT publishers out there on the market today, ranging from IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, IT security, and pretty much anything else in between. His experience from multiple types of positions in the industry, allowing them to have a bigger position, or I'm sorry, bigger picture in mind when helping organizations with their IT needs. Before we get started, let me introduce Flycast Partners. Flycast Partners offers best-in-class implementation services and training in IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, IT security, enterprise service management, and workload automation spaces, all using ITIL best practices. Our professional services team has well over 5,600 professional services engagements, both on-site and remote. And as a company, Flycast Partners has over 1,200, almost 1,300 customers, regular customers, time and time again throughout Canada and the United States. I encourage you to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. Visit our website, chat with our IT experts live Monday through Friday Eastern time from 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. They're happy to get you white papers, data sheets, demos, help you out with remote administration services, professional services, support if depending on the tool, and any other questions you might have, or you can simply email us at info@flycastpartners.com. During today's presentation, if you have a question, please type that in the question area of this webcast. Kyle Hamilton is going to take time to answer as many questions as our time will allow today. So type those questions in and I will read those off to Kyle. And without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Kyle. Kyle, you now have control, sir.
And good afternoon, good morning to everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to today's presentation. As Rich mentioned, my name is Kyle Hamilton. I'm a sales engineer at Flycast. And the topic of today's discussion is going to be really centered around best practices. I'll show a couple of examples just to give you an idea of some of the elements that I'll be mentioning. But just keep in mind that the goal of this is to be really product agnostic, and that these principles, philosophies, some of them opinions, can be applied across any platform, any service management tool that you might be using. I focused on this specific topic for two reasons. Number one, asset management / CMDB, the construction of that asset management database, or that CMDB, is almost always at the top of every customer's concern list or priority list that I typically speak to. It's something that everyone struggles to get a handle on, as well as keep a handle on, especially now that things are much more scattered and remote than what they were just 18 months ago. And so there's a lot of companies that are undergoing this process, and I find that we're going to talk about today some of the hurdles and some of the challenges they face, and where they go wrong. So let me talk first about some of the interrelationships between idle processes. When you look at the different IT service management processes, incident, problem, change, you got knowledge management, service level management. In many cases, those different components can operate individually. In other words, you can do incident management by itself. There's no requirement that you have to have service levels, no requirement that you have to be doing, change management. All right, so it's kind of a standalone. Change management would be the same. A lot of customers leverage different tools just for the purpose of tracking changes. They're not involved in incidents. They're not dealing with service catalog and customer requests. They're just tracking internal changes. So those are two examples of, ITIL processes that really don't have to have, they can, but don't have to have any dependencies or relationships to any other process. They could be operated in a completely standalone fashion. Now, there's other examples where there is differing levels of dependency. Service level management would be one of the extreme examples. Service level management does you no good unless there's an incident or a problem or change or a request or something to associate it and link it to track it. Just having a service level agreement does nothing unless you've got a ticket or a change or something that it applies to. So that's an example where, in order to leverage service level management, there's some basic requirements that have to be fulfilled in order to make it valuable, in order to make it worthwhile.
Kyle, are you sharing anything from your screen at all?
Not yet.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Sure. Now, the same kind of dependency exists to some extent when we talk about change management and we talk about CMDB. Now, there's certainly no hard requirement. You could certainly track and manage assets, build a CMDB as a standalone process without incident, problem, change. However, when you get into things like change management, you'll find that that's going to be a crucial or critical component, not in constructing the CMDB necessarily, but in maintaining it. So while it's not a hard and fast dependency, change management is one of those idle processes I see that is complementary. It adds additional value to the CMDB, and allows you to maintain it and keep it up to date. So let's talk about a couple of the basic philosophies or principles around building a CMDB, whatever the tool may be. Number one, when you're constructing a CMDB, one thing to keep in mind when you're starting to think about what you want to put into the CMDB, keep in mind this first rule of thumb is that anything you put into the CMDB, and I mean anything. So if I'm looking at an asset like I've got on the screen here, every single attribute that you see on this screen, from the model to the serial number to the memory to the OS versions, hard drives, listings, NIC cards, network adapters, things like that. Every piece of that information that you put into the CMDB, every field needs to be under the control of change management. So another way to put that is, if you don't want to, let's take memory, for example, if you're not going to lock that down so that if the memory on a server, for example, needs to be increased, if you're managing that in the CMDB, then there needs to be a change request that shows it's gone through the process, whether it requires approvals or not, that documents that change, being requested, being approved as necessary, and then being implemented, so that you have that audit trail. If you don't want to do that, if you're not looking to track memory, maybe you just want to track operating system, manufacturer, model, serial number, asset tag, things like that. If that's all you are willing to track through change management, then that's all you want to put into the CMDB. What you don't want is to put a bunch of detail and a bunch of values, right? And it can go even deeper. Right? You get into, physical storage and tracking monitors that are connected and things like that. If you're not going to manage, each individual attribute through that change process, then the best practice is not to put it in there. Now, the second big rule of thumb when it comes to constructing the CMDB is whatever you put in there, whatever data or information you decide to track and manage, if you cannot maintain at least a 98% degree of accuracy, meaning that if you've got, it's 1,000 assets or whether it's 1,000, fields of information, you want it so that if you go to look at that data, 980 of those 1,000 assets in there are going to be complete and accurate and up to date. And no more than 20 out of that 1,000 can have any kind of, deviation, from that accuracy. The flip side of that is if you cannot accurately, maintain that 98 or better percentage, the recommendation is not to track it. Don't undertake it. And that's primarily because this is a complementary process to incident. If you're troubleshooting or problem management, if you're doing root cause analysis, or most importantly, changes, where in many cases you're going to be relying and drawing upon this CMDB information to analyze and do a risk analysis on your changes. Inevitably, and I've seen this happen time and time again, the time that you go to rely on that data or that change analysis, and you go and you look at that information and perhaps say, we're going to be modifying this server. What's the downside if this server goes offline? What applications, what other devices, what other network connectivity may be lost as a part of that outage? And if you're relying upon one of those 20 devices that I talked about that's out of sync or has incorrect data, that's when Murphy is going to strike. And inevitably, you'll be looking at one of those 20 when you go to analyze that change. And that's the worst scenario, is when you rely on that data to make a rational business decision, and then only come to find out that that data was invalid or incorrect. And then, of course, chaos ensues. And in the first question, and typically that comes back from executives or management, is, well, if it's not accurate, then why are we tracking it? And that's where you come back to maintaining that 98% degree of accuracy or better, comes into play as a rule. Now, that's going to be a tall challenge, depending upon how much information you want to put into the CMDB. So I'd say that's really the first big decision, is to think about what types of devices, what applications, what network equipment, what components, memory, hard drives, otherwise, do you want to track, and are you willing, to track through changes, so that you can limit the scope and don't put in any more than what you're going to be capable of, or what your team's going to be capable of maintaining and updating, whether that's manually, which is rare. In all but the smallest organizations, it's almost inevitably going to fall to some type of a network discovery solution, or some agent-based solution, whether it's some endpoint management tool, or whether it's Microsoft SCCM or Intune, that's going to be doing some repetitive scheduled scan of these devices and updating that information, so you can keep the bulk of it, all of those things that can be discovered easily, up to date. But the pitfall that a lot of customers fall into when using those types of tools is they fall back and rely upon those tools as their CMDB information. So if I have a scan that sweeps the network and it reports back that it found 1,000 devices on my network, I have no way to argue with it. I just simply have to take that as accurate in fact that I have 1,000 devices out there. Because I'm not managing it and tracking it manually through change management, which would give me a check and balance against that discovery process, so that essentially, if you're using an agent-based tool or you are scanning the network, that should be your check on the CMDB that you already have. It shouldn't be used to solely populate it and just spit it back out in a report and say, here's what the tools say we have, therefore this must be what we have. What you want to do is be tracking it and managing it in the CMDB in conjunction with changes, so that when that information is fed in, regardless of the source, that you can then use that list and compare that against what you already hold and what you've already updated in the CMDB, and those two should match. If there's any deviation between what your endpoint management tool says and what your CMDB has, that's where you've gotten out of sync. That's where changes are missing. Things have been done out of band. And that's how you're able to identify that and close those gaps and fix those problems. When you're solely reliant upon that discovery information to tell you what you have versus having a good understanding already and being able to use the discovery solution to verify that, you're really hampering the process in terms of maintaining accuracy and maintaining completeness of that data, and that you're solely reliant upon the tool because there's no manual tracking outside of that. So you really want to have both processes in place, and use your discovery or your agent-based tools that are out there running on a scheduled basis purely as a check, so that reality actually matches up with what you have in the CMDB at that moment. I'm going to stop for just a minute, and Rich will check real fast. Do we have any questions so far? You might be on mute, Rich. All right, we'll take that as a no. All right, so I've talked a little bit about the importance of change. So let's talk about how change factors
Sorry about
in.
that. My mic wasn't working there, so we're good. We don't have any questions. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Now, in most cases, the tools are going to allow you so that when you're, working with a change request, whatever that may be, that your tool, offers you or gives you the ability. Let's say go this one. Actually gives you the ability to link that record to a specific asset. So you can see here on this particular change form, this is where that CMDB gives me the ability to search and browse those assets that I've populated in there, so that when I'm creating or submitting that change request, I have the ability to be able to go in and link that to that change request, so that it provides me the ability to report on, creates the audit trail, right? So that'll allow me to go take a look at these assets and be able to see, just like I can here, all of the changes, in this case, 37 changes that have been made to this particular server. So that, this should back up or essentially document any update to the OS, if I'm tracking that, any update to the asset tag, if we've changed tags for whatever reason, or swapped out NIC cards and I'm managing the network adapter information, so that if I'm swapping out that network adapter, or if I'm adding memory or upgrading the OS, this is where I should see a change request for that OS upgrade, or for that memory upgrade, or for that NIC card swap. Now, you'll also frequently see that when you link those assets, to your request, it'll also give you the ability to leverage that information or use that information, of course, to do that risk analysis. So this is where can be based on, part of that can be based on the responses to the questions, but of course, a lot of this could be driven by the CMDB. Understanding, being able to answer the first question in this case, without a CMDB that shows you, what applications are running on that device and what other devices or what other databases or other applications may be reliant or connected to it, it may be hard to answer that very first question, because you really don't know in many cases. So things like that are where the CMDB can help provide those answers, so that you're reflecting the accurate risk of the change. Now, that may be driven off more than the questions you see here. So that risk level could also just be purely based on the device associated with the change itself. So that you may have a risk value associated with a particular device, and that plays into the ultimate risk value. But you'll see down here, even how many different applications are going to be affected. Well, that means you have to understand exactly what's installed on that box and who's using that application. How many users connect to it and when. What's their usage pattern. So there's a lot of information in that CMDB that factors into, number one, the analysis, the risk analysis or impact analysis, if you will, of the change. But it also provides information related to approval. Based on that risk analysis, do we do this or not? So having a good understanding of that risk profile is critical for those that are being tasked with reviewing the change and deciding whether it's something that needs to be done, put off, completely, canceled altogether, based on, that CMDB information. Now, you'll also find in many cases that you'll have some tools available within your CMDB to help you track and manage those changes to the devices. Now, in the case of, let me take this, go back to my CI here, and let's go to details. And you'll notice right here, there's a little checkbox in this case. It may happen differently or be set up differently in your specific application. But this is a great way for all of those devices and applications that you're going to track and manage to be able to identify those that fall under the purview of change management. And really, as I mentioned, typically the rule is if it's in there, that box should be checked. Now, there could be examples where you're managing, let's say, non-IT assets. It could be a desk chair, credenza, fire extinguishers, or safety equipment, all types of other box of light bulbs. If you're tracking, bulk assets, but obviously those things, we're not going to have to put a change request through every time you want to change a light bulb, right? So there are some instances in asset management where that won't apply. But when we're talking about configuration management, really every CI or configuration item you have in the CMDB should be under change control. Now, you'll notice in this particular case, this has an effect of doing several things. Number one, once I put it under change control, it gives me the ability to develop or set up a baseline. And a baseline is nothing more than a snapshot of the configuration. So it's a way to take a snapshot in time that you can use so that, and let's take a look at, I already have it up here. Yep, yes we do. Right here, you'll see I've got several different options in regards to using those baselines. So once I've flagged something as being, in control or under change management, it gives me the ability to go in and say, okay, I want to create a new baseline for this specific CI. And what that does, it essentially just takes, all the initial values, I'll just call it initial, and store those, in a record off to the side, right? So take a snapshot of that device and how it's set up and set it off to the side so that I can then go back using those baselines and I can do comparisons or do snapshots of those, like you see up top here. So I can go in and take a look, at a particular baseline image. I can also show the variation or the deviation from the baseline. So if it's been 6 months since I've taken that baseline image, I can come in and say, show me the variance, and it's going to compare the current state of that device at that time to whatever baseline, I want to compare it to. And it will create, down here at the bottom, you'll see, right, a library of those baselines. So I could actually go in and, say, take my initial baseline, and then you'll see you can also have it automatically create a new baseline for you every time you implement a change, so that whatever change has been identified or detailed in that request, once it's completed successfully or implemented successfully, then that change request can automatically, kick off, in this case, another baseline, so that I can then come in and I can take those baseline images and see where there's differences from one snapshot to the other, right? Has the memory changed? Has the drive configuration changed? Anything that we're tracking in that baseline. So I can compare, two snapshots in time, compare today to 3 months ago, or compare today to a year ago, or compare today to yesterday. Or in the case where I just want to compare the current against the baseline, is where I simply take the device as it stands right now, select that initial baseline I created, and say, show me any variance between them. And you can see there's one change, and it really doesn't amount to a change other than the fact that they removed the decimal point. But that way, this is a great tool in regards to change management and that CMDB, to show you, where those deviations occur. Because if you don't have a baseline, for that change, but something has been altered, then that means, again, something's been done out of bounds or out of band. And that's where you need to find out what happened, who did it, why was it done that way, and get that corrected so that you can close that gap in the future. Because ultimately you would want, every baseline image, no matter what you compare, today against 6 months, or today against a year, or today against yesterday, you want no deviations across the board. That should be, equal in comparison in terms of all the configuration data. And if you have any kind of deviation or change when you compare those, and it's not related to a change request, then you know that you've got something to investigate. So there are, different tools that are available to help you manage and track any deviations. Being able to create automated baselines is great, but ultimately, that baseline image, whether you have a specific feature for that or not, is going to be that initial information that you put in there, that you import day one. That becomes the baseline, and then from that day forward, you're going to be tracking and managing any deviations from that, and making sure that any changes that do occur have a corresponding change request associated with them, so that you have that audit trail and the ability to go back and verify that data. Now, depending upon the tool, that can also extend to additional information that you may track and manage. And this, of course, just ups the ante on that task in terms of the time and effort, the resources it's going to take to be able to administer and manage. Because now we're not only talking about maybe 1,000 assets or 1,000 devices in that database, but also then creating, maintaining, updating and deleting the relationships that exist between those devices. And again, this is where it really becomes important for things like change management, to be able to have this kind of information. So if my change is being done at this level, right, then it easily allows me to see and visualize what those downstream applications are, so I can accurately answer that risk analysis. Or if I'm being asked to approve this change, I have information at my disposal to be able to make that decision without having to call, a meeting of the minds and get my network admins together and all my server, admins and application owners in the room, so that we can basically discuss what's shown and displayed in this simple diagram. But again, you have to make a conscious decision if that information is worth the added effort and the added resources would be required to maintain that. Again, there are tools that can help you create those relationships and dependencies so that you can automate as much of that as possible, and not have to devote an entire team, of group of individuals to manage this data, but can instead manage it with one full-time employee or half, of a full-time employee, and allow the automation to maintain the rest. Of course, that's all dependent, and being able to do that with one FTE or half FTE, and that you've got a good, solid change management process. And so when we're talking about implementing CMDB, and or you're talking about implementing change management should always come first, ultimately. You really never want to embark on building a CMDB if you don't have a good, effective change management process in place, because within a very, very short time frame, I mean, less than a day, you're gonna be less than that 98% accurate, because things are going to be changing that quickly. And if you don't have a handle on it from the moment you put that device in there, once it gets out of sync, and it starts drifting further and further away, it becomes more and more difficult. And I've seen it time and time again where that happens over time, and the customer or the company ends up having to scrap it essentially and start over from scratch so that they can populate those devices back in there and get them under change control from day one, so they don't let things spin out of control. Because getting it all back and accurate once it's kind of spun out can often be more difficult than starting from scratch, which is why a lot of customers end up going that route. So you always want to have change management well under your thumb before you start looking at populating data in the CMDB, so that moment one you've got a good handle and can make sure that maintains that degree of accuracy and completeness. Now the other piece to that with change management and the CMDB, due to the level of effort, is going to be start small. When you're talking about what you want to put in the CMDB, because you're going to have to run it through change. Again, not only do you want to take into account what kinds of devices do you want to track, right? So applications, computers, services, things like that. But I would always say, in order to hone the process and get everything down, don't even start with all one type of device. I would start with a very select, call it a test group. Some customers will take one application, right? So maybe, their HR app or their CRM app or logistics app. They'll start with just one application, and they'll add all the configuration items for that one application. So just those servers, those applications specifically, the switches and routers and things that join those or sit in between those apps and databases and the different devices, and use that as a pilot to test out the change process, and leave that in place for anywhere from, say, 30 days to maybe 90 days, depending upon how big of an app or how big of a chunk you've worked with, so that only once you feel like you've got that one application well under control, everything's getting a change put in, you're maintaining the accuracy, your diagrams and the connectivity is accurate and complete. And only once you feel like, okay, this application's knocked out, then you start looking for, what's the next, low-hanging fruit, or that next app or next piece of the network we'd like to replicate this same thing with, and roll it out in manageable chunks. Eat the elephant one bite at a time, rather than doing that the wham bang approach where you get servers and services and apps and network equipment and everything all at once. And you go from 0 to 60 real fast. And again, if you don't have everything well under control and have that process honed out, it's going to spin out of control. When you're working with one app, it's a lot easier, when you're dealing with 25 items versus 25,000, to be able to maintain that accuracy and only increase and go from one app to two apps, or go from 50 devices to 200 to 500, and it typically will speed up. And so once you get the first one down and everybody's comfortable with the process, then you may add 2 or 3 apps in the next round, or a whole segment of the network that may involve more than just applications, and approach it that way, just to ensure that as you grow the CMDB, that everything that's going in there, as it's going in there, is tightly controlled and managed, so that you don't find yourself in one of those scenarios where you just simply have to rely on what it's telling you because there's no other way to, there's no argument against it, or a situation where you've got a bunch of information in here that nobody ever looks at because nobody trusts it, in which case it's just a lot of wasted effort. So that's really where the importance of having good, effective change management comes in terms of the CMDB. Is it's one of those. It's not a requirement. It's not. You can do it without it, as I mentioned before. It's not like service level management that just can't exist on its own. But CMDB on its own is going to be fraught with error, and it's going to be fraught with incomplete and inaccurate data. If you don't have that change management process. So the change management is complementary and is going to enhance the use of the CMDB simply by making it accurate and complete. And then we've got about 5 minutes or so. So I'll throw it up to back to the group for any questions, comments.
We have questions. All right.
Okay.
Folks want to know what tool we're using today.
This particular tool is Ivanti Service Management.
Okay, and then here's a question. For a mid-sized company, how long will it take in average to fully implement CMDB, including pilot and planning? Boy, that's a loaded question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. It can span, again, it all comes down to what size bite are you looking to take. If you're talking about mapping an application out now, again, keep in mind, there's a question about the CMDB, but I don't know if that also involves getting your change process spun up at the same time, or if that's already in place and you're just looking for the CMDB piece. But either way, it is difficult to say. Whether you're talking about 200 assets or 200,000, that makes a big difference. Obviously, what level of detail are you looking to track? So just model, serial number, and asset tag, or are you looking to go a lot deeper? As well as, are you looking to track any relationships, things like that? It's with the tools that are out there and available today, collecting this information is rather easy. Now, if you don't have anything today, if there's no asset management in place, not even a spreadsheet, spread around maybe 20 spreadsheets managed by department heads. If you don't have that to feed in, that initial list that we can check against, then you're really back to what I mentioned before, where we're going to have to do that network scan or use SCCM or Intune or whatever you have in place, use that to feed what it finds into the CMDB, and then you're going to have to start with that. So in the absence of any existing asset database or some type of a informal CMDB, even if it's scattered, you're going to need to start with what you've got. And ultimately, if you don't have anything right now, that's going to be what we can go out and collect. Then you populate that. Again, not everything, take a small set and start tracking and managing it from there, and then bring in a little bit more once you can accurately keep that up to date. It can go anywhere from, I would say, on the small, setting up a CMDB could be anywhere from 2 weeks and easily span, 6, 8 weeks, just depending upon level of complexity and a lot of times geographic distribution, things like that.
Folks, we have a couple more minutes. If there are any other questions out there, go ahead and type them in real quick. Oh, here we go. Here's another one. Do you know of any inexpensive or free data library for normalization out there?
For normalization, not that I'm aware of. Most of the time when if you're gonna have a database or any kind of CMDB that provides normalization, or reconciliation, it's called in some cases, where you can feed in multiple sources and create the rules for what data comes from what source. Take the serial number from this database and get the the warranty from this source and get the computer name from AD. That's where it requires normalization and reconciliation, so I can basically tell it how to, if I get one that says it's Apple Inc. and another reports it as Apple, and I want them all normalized to Apple or Apple Inc. one, and pick one or the other. So, because that's typically the stuff, for those that aren't familiar with it, that's what wreaks havoc with your reports, right? You'll have one computer that's going to report back that it's a Dell computer, desktop, and another one will have its Dell Inc. Right? Same vendor, sometimes even the same model. It's just the way they put that into the BIOS, and for some reason they change from day to day. So normalization would take those two and allow you to record those both as Dell, if that's the way you want it, versus finding that you're missing devices when you go try to pull all the Dells, because some of them show up as Dell computers and some of them show as Dell Computers Inc. and Dell Inc. So if you're looking for a database to do that, it's normally going to be a part, a foundational element of your service management tool. And I would say most of the mid-level to enterprise tools are going to provide normalization and a reconciliation engine that you can configure. Now on the low end, your things like Trackit, Manage Engine, some of your what I call the help desk, the help desk on Rails, quick to implement, very simple to use, but don't offer some of those advanced features, right? Like the ability to feed in multiple sources and normalize it or reconcile it. So you're typically going to be looking at mid-level market tools to enterprise tools to provide that. I don't know of anything standalone that provides that. There might very well be just a general database that's out there. Now its status as to freeware or for purchase, that I don't know. But I can tell you all things like Ivanti we're looking at here. When you're talking about BMC tools, Sharewell, things like that, those are all going to provide you with a reconciliation and normalization engine. Just when you get to the lower end, we're going to find it to be more basic features. You can still automatically discover and feed it in, but you're not going to have the level of flexibility to take multiple sources and normalize it and reconcile it down.
Okay, next question. Can you include mobile devices as well, or you need an MDM tool like Intune in place first? And this is a follow-up of the gentleman that was asking about how long it took to fully implement CMDB, including pilot and planning.
Yeah, so you can absolutely include mobile. And keep in mind, there's no rule that says you have to use anything like Intune or anything like that. So I can just come in and create I can go in and create a new mobile device, register a new iPhone or Android device just by typing in or populating the data and hitting save. So you can certainly track mobile as well as any other types of, and most of your service management tools are going to provide for different types of assets out of the box that you want to track, but usually that's a configurable list. So whether you create them manually through the UI, whether you import them from spreadsheets, whether you feed them from Intune or SECM or Ivanti's endpoint management, does not matter. Those are all valid options. So really we just say wherever if you've got the data existing and and it's accurate and up to date, we can absolutely use that to populate the CMDB and start to, get rid of that source at that point and start to then manage and track everything through your service management tool under the guise of change management. But there's no requirement that you have to use an MDM solution for that. Most tools that are going to do your network scans, your network sweeps and things like that, they're going to find anything. So they're going to find switches, network printers, anything that's got an IP address. It could be a Xbox. If it's on your network, it's going to find it. So that's going to be able to catch everything. It's really including your mobile. So if they're connected to your network, they're going to get picked up at the same time everything else is. So you don't necessarily need an MDM tool, but you could certainly use Intune or AirWatch or anything like that and use that as a potential source to feed in your MDM from AirWatch or Intune, and then feed in your desktops, laptops, and servers, maybe from SCCM or Ivanti's endpoint management tool. That's where having that reconciliation and that normalization engine can help come into play, because what you don't want to have is your network scan coming back and saying, well, I found a mobile device, and then you've got your MDM solution like Intune saying, well, I've got a mobile device, and then we got to figure out, is that the same mobile device or are those different? That's where the reconciliation and normalization come into play. Is what happens if I'm feeding 3 or 4 sources in, and all 3 or 4 sources present to me the same device. Which one do I take? Which one has priority?
All right, and we've actually gone over time, folks. So if you do have any other additional questions other than what you've already asked, please go ahead and reach out to us. Call us at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. You can also chat with us live during regular business hours. We are happy to chat with you Eastern time from 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Our IT experts are happy to get you any demos or get you data sheets, white papers, anything that you may be looking for. They'll be happy to get you that information. You can also email us at info@flycastpartners.com. And without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and give all of you the rest of your day back to you. And I hope that everyone stays safe out there until our next broadcast. Thank you for your time. It's very much appreciated. Kyle, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule as well. Thank you for a great presentation.
You're welcome, and thank you, everybody. Have a great one.